Number 11. Bungled home invasion. On June 22, 2017, a woman was found dead in her Van Buren Township home, and her lifeless body was wrapped up in Christmas lights. The victim was identified as 27-year-old singer Egypt Covington, and at first it was believed that someone she knew had killed her. But court testimony revealed that she wasn't even the intended target. She lived in a duplex, and her neighbor was away for the Electric Forest Music Festival at the time of the incident. According to the same court testimony, the neighbor sold marijuana, and Shane Lamar Evans, who did yard maintenance at the complex, knew that nobody would be home during the festival. The burglary was intended to be carried out at the neighbor's place, but they ended up hitting the wrong house. Shane, who was 31 years old, 34-year-old Timothy Eugene Moore, and 28-year-old Shandon Ray Groom were arrested in November 2020 in connection with Covington's murder. The three men were accused of breaking into her home and shooting her before binding her with Christmas lights. The murder investigation went unsolved for over 3 years before the arrests were made. After court testimony indicated that the death occurred during a bungled home invasion, all three men were accused of murder and sentenced to stand trial in March 2021. Shane pleaded guilty to second-degree murder, and afterward, his charges of first-degree home invasion and felony murder were dropped. And in April 2023, he was sentenced to serve 15 to 25 years in jail. The other two suspects, Timothy Eugene Moore and Shandon Ray Groom, have yet to receive their sentences, but they are scheduled to go to trial in July 2023. Number 10. Breonna Taylor. On March 13, 2020, a young woman was shot by at least 7 police officers after they forced themselves into her apartment while she was asleep. According to a lawsuit filed by 26-year-old Breonna Taylor's family, police executed a botched search warrant of their Louisville, Kentucky home, killing the woman in the process. The family claims that Taylor and her boyfriend, 27-year-old Kenneth Walker, who was also in the home at the time, believed that they were being robbed. They also explained that this was why Walker fired at the officers first, thinking it was in self-defense. The lawsuit further claims that the authorities blindly fired more than 20 shots into the apartment. Following the shooting, the Louisville Metro Police Department stated that the officers had knocked on the door several times and announced themselves as police with a search warrant before forcing their way inside. However, the officers were immediately met with gunfire upon entering. The lawsuit disputes the police department's accounts of the events, though, and asserts that Taylor's constitutional rights were violated by the officers' use of extreme and deadly force. The police struck Taylor 8 times, while her boyfriend Kenneth was arrested and charged with assault and attempted murder on a police officer. Reports indicate that the police investigation was initially centered around a trap house located more than 10 miles from Taylor's apartment. A judge had authorized a no-knock search warrant, which allowed officers to enter the premises without identifying themselves. But the warrant was issued for a suspect who was already in police custody and lived in a different part of the city. The lawsuit asserts that Taylor and Walker were in their bedroom asleep when plain-clothed officers arrived in unmarked vehicles, searching for a suspect who wasn't present at the residence. In September 2020, the city of Louisville paid Taylor's family $12 million in damages and pledged to reform police practices. Number 9. David Sommer. On June 19, 2017, a man's dead body was discovered in his own house by a Meals on Wheels worker, and as it turned out, a neighbor was responsible for his death. 40-year-old Michael Robert Jose Harbour was arrested for murdering David Sommer, a 60-year-old Tampa Tribune reporter, in the midst of an armed robbery. At first, the man's death was said to be a result of unnatural causes, but after an investigation, the authorities changed their mind and believed that instead Sommer had been murdered. Harbour had already been detained at the Pinellas County Jail on a probation breach of felony battery when he was arrested on a Friday morning for the new charge. The murderer persuaded neighbors that Sommer owed him money for garden maintenance and then went to the man's home on Harbor Cove Street to rob him. Sommer then lost his life as a result of homicidal violence during the heist, according to the sheriff's office. Unfortunately, no other information was provided how Harbour managed to kill Sommer, but his body was discovered by a Meals on Wheels delivery worker just one day after the robbery had taken place. Security footage shows Harbour entering and heading out of Sommer's home during the robbery and murder, and no one else was caught approaching the property. The sheriff's office also stated that Harbour made contradictory claims throughout the inquiry, which led law enforcement to grow suspicious of him. According to state records, Harbour pleaded guilty to domestic violence by strangulation in January 2016. He's already been jailed 3 times for breaking his probation, and the last time he did this was on June 20th, just 2 days after the sheriff's office claims he murdered Sommer. He entered a guilty plea just a week before his murder trial was set to begin. In addition to the murder charge, Harbour also pleaded guilty to solicitation to commit murder, as prosecutors claim that he attempted to arrange for the death of a witness listed to testify against him in the murder trial. In the end, Sommer was sentenced to spend 30 years in the Tampa Bay jail. Number 8. Betty Thomas. In June 2019, an elderly woman from Texas was viciously stabbed to death in her home by a Spectrum employee, who later used her cards to go on a shopping spree. 83-year-old Betty Thomas was murdered by 43-year-old Roy James Holden. He'd previously worked at her home and returned the next day while off-duty and in uniform to pose as if he was on the job. He then entered her home and stabbed her to death, after which he stole her credit and debit cards. Chris Hamilton, the trial lawyer representing the family of the victim, stated that the verdict was a result of a shocking breach of faith by Charter Communications, a company that sends workers inside millions of homes every year. The trial testimony revealed that the company hired Roy without verifying his employment history, and that his lies about his previous jobs went unchecked by Spectrum supervisors, who simply ignored the red flags. The company was accused of refusing to correct its bad safety practices. And additionally, the jury found that attorneys for the company used a forged document to try and force the lawsuit into a direction where the results would have been kept secret. Damages for the murder would have also been limited to the amount of Betty Thomas's final bill. In June 2022, a Dallas County jury found Charter Communications, the parent company of Spectrum, grossly negligent in Thomas's death. They awarded a verdict of $375 million in compensatory damages and held the company responsible for paying 90% of it due to their systematic failures in pre-employee screening, hiring, and supervision practices. In July 2022, the verdict for punitive damages was announced and totaled $7.37 billion. The cable company has been ordered to pay the damages to the family, but they intend to appeal the decision, stating that the employee was solely responsible for Thomas's death. They argue that the company shouldn't be held liable for Roy's criminal actions. In December 2019, Roy was arrested for capital murder in relation to Thomas's death, and after pleading guilty to murder in April 2021, he was sentenced to serve life behind bars. Number 7. Justice is finally served. In January 2020, a woman stabbed an old man to death in his home, and upon further investigation, the killer was found to have a long criminal history. 28-year-old Yana Torres was accused of fatally stabbing 84-year-old Reginald Sanford during an argument inside his home in Granby, Massachusetts. After the murder, Torres fled the scene in Sanford's car. Luckily, though, she was arrested and charged with the man's murder and was held without bail. Police were alerted to the crime after neighbors found Sanford's body, and according to documents, he died from severe lacerations and significant blood loss. Early on, Torres's court-appointed attorney requested a psychological evaluation of his client, which was approved by the judge. Torres, who has a criminal record, was linked to the scene through fingerprints, and police reported that a woman resembling Torres was caught on surveillance footage abandoning Sanford's car in an alley in Holyoke on the Friday after the murder. The prosecutors didn't provide details on the relationship between Torres and Sanford, but his death was the first homicide in Granby in roughly 10 years. The killer has had many run-ins with the law for cocaine possession, scuffles with police, and attacks with cutting instruments, based on court documents. She had a past of mental illness, crack cocaine addiction, and a history of getting placed in institutions like group homes and jails. Torres was sentenced to 120 days in prison in 2018 for crack cocaine possession, as well as battery and assault of 2 police officers. She was also detained in June of that year when police discovered her purchasing baggies of the substance behind an apartment block. She bit one cop on the forearm and the other on the knuckle during the arrest. But despite this and the fact that she tested positive for cocaine, the Holyoke District Court judge ordered her release. After murdering Sanford, however, Torres was sentenced to life in prison without the option of parole. Number 6. Extreme jealousy. In July 2013, a woman was killed inside her Canopolis home by the wife of a man who she suspected of having an affair with. 66-year-old Marlene Johnson was arrested for the murder of 62-year-old Shirley Pierce. Johnson had a comfortable life, but in 2003 she suffered a nervous breakdown and attempted to end things once and for all, which resulted in her becoming unstable and physically abusive. She even threatened to kill her husband Irvin and stabbed him once, leaving him with a scar. In 2006, Irvin started working at Tuscarora Yarns, where he first came into contact with Pierce, the company's executive secretary. Marlene began to believe that her husband and Pierce were having an affair, and so she hired a private investigator to obtain evidence. Despite the investigator finding no proof, Marlene became obsessed with Pierce and hired another PI firm that used drones to track the woman's movements. After reviewing the drone footage, Marlene learned that Pierce left her garage door open. In February 2011, Marlene confronted her husband's alleged mistress outside a restaurant where she was having lunch with co-workers. Marlene physically assaulted her while screaming that she would kill her for sleeping with Irvin. After the murder, investigators acquired a search warrant to look through Marlene's home and alerted the public to be on the lookout for her car. They eventually caught up with her at her lawyer's office in Salisbury, North Carolina, where they discovered Pierce's mail and cleaning supplies in the trunk of her vehicle. When detectives searched her home, they found various aerial photographs, maps of Pierce's street and home, and images of her van, among other things. The extensive surveillance materials on Shirley showed that the woman was obsessed with her. On the night of July 23, 2013, detectives attempted to interview Marlene, but she refused to answer any questions without her lawyer present. It was at this time that officers noticed several cuts, scratches, and red marks on her hand. Marlene was then arrested for first-degree murder just after midnight on July 24th. After less than 2 hours of deliberation, a jury found Marlene guilty in the killing of Shirley Pierce. The verdict was delivered, and Marlene, who was 66 at the time, collapsed to the floor upon hearing it. She continues to claim her innocence, however, despite the guilty verdict. Marlene is being held at Anson Correctional Institution, which is located outside of Charlotte. The sentence for her conviction was life in prison without parole. Have you ever had a scary encounter with a stranger while home alone? Let us know in the comments below. And while you're at it, hit that subscribe button and join the Badger fam. Number 5. Deadly self-defense. In February 2023, a woman in Florida shot and killed an intruder who posed a threat to her life while she was home alone. The incident occurred during the early morning hours in the town of Interlaken, just west of Gainesville. When the police arrived, they found 67-year-old Amber Babcock, who unlocked the front door to let deputies inside. 64-year-old Reginald Best was discovered in the kitchen on his back, and the authorities found a revolver a few feet away from the dead body. Best was also handcuffed and had a single gunshot wound in his back. Babcock told officers that the perpetrator kept saying that someone was after him and that he feared for his life. At first, she thought it was her husband at the door because he works odd hours, but as soon as she opened it, Best barged into her home. She asked him to leave many times, but Best was desperate, and as he raised his arm, she could see that he had a gun. So, in self-defense, Babcock fired one shot from her own firearm. one that proved fatal. Best had previously made several calls to dispatch, claiming that he was hiding from his neighbors and people in orange. Another woman had called to report that Best had jumped out of a window with a gun before running down the street like a madman. After the man arrived at Putnam County Medical Center, he was pronounced dead by staff. In a statement, the authorities stated that Best was unfortunately struggling with some mental issues, but they also announced that Babcock acted out of self-defense and that she had every right to eliminate the threat. Number 4. A tragic love triangle. In May 2023, a man turned himself into the police after shooting his wife and her girlfriend at their home. The Tracy Police Department is currently investigating a double homicide that took place at a residence in the 2400 block of Sunflower Lane in California, and 55-year-old Satnam Sumal has been arrested by authorities in connection with the case. The police identified the deceased victims as 37-year-old Anjiba Baladi and 39-year-old Satbinder Singh, the wife of the suspect. Tracy Police Sergeant Michael Richards stated that the three individuals, Sumal, his wife and her girlfriend, all lived together in the Sunflower Lane home. Richards also mentioned that Sumal was aware of the romantic relationship between his wife and the other woman. The police department disclosed that Sumal surrendered himself by walking into the police station and confessing to shooting his wife and her girlfriend. A firearm believed to be the murder weapon was discovered in the home, and neighbors of the family reported that the victims and the suspect kept to themselves in an otherwise tightly knit community. In the end, Sumal was charged with 2 counts of murder and was subsequently booked into the San Joaquin County Jail. For the time being, he's waiting for his next trial date from behind bars. Number 3. A father's love. On December 12, 2020, a man was shot to death by his own son in their Maryland home. On a Saturday afternoon, deputies from the Carroll County Sheriff's Office rushed to the 100 block of Marydell Drive in the city of Westminster after receiving a report of a man who'd been shot multiple times in the chest. Emergency medical service personnel attempted to save the victim, identified as 49-year-old Stephen Hartman, but he was pronounced dead shortly after. Further investigation by the Carroll County Sheriff's Office revealed that the perpetrator was Stephen's son, 21-year-old Lucas Hartman, who also lived at the Marydell Road residence. Lucas was accused of shooting his father multiple times with a 9mm firearm. As a result, he was charged with first-degree murder, as well as the use of a firearm in a crime of violence. The murderer was initially held in custody at the Carroll County Detention Center. Lucas informed police that he shot his father to protect his mother, who was reportedly abused. But according to the prosecutor, Deputy State's Attorney Sandra Johnson, the charges were false. Johnson had also requested for a life sentence with no time suspended because the crime was intentional and unprovoked. However, Seth Oken, the defense attorney, praised Johnson's willingness to negotiate with him on a settlement for Lucas. Judge Fred Hecker considered many factors when sentencing Lucas for the first-degree murder of his father, such as his age, demonstration of remorse, character evidence, and a lack of a criminal record. On the other hand, Oken portrayed Stephen Hartman as a controlling father and husband who monitored every aspect of his family's life, deciding who would come and go from the house. But Johnson disagreed with this portrayal and presented video testimony from Hartman's family members in Alaska, who described him as a kind and loving father. Johnson also mentioned that Stephen was a computer gaming programmer and had no history of violent tendencies. Lucas, who was 24 at the time, pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and was sentenced on May 3, 2023 to 40 years in prison. Number 2. TYREE HALSELL. On August 2nd, 2020, at approximately 9:30 p.m., a tragic shooting took place in East Akron, where a 20-month-old baby was killed and 2 adults were injured. The incident happened at a house located on 5th Avenue, where a man and woman were shot as they got out of their car in their driveway. Tragically, the baby, 20-month-old TYREE HALSELL, was also shot and later passed away at the hospital. The unnamed man and woman were rushed to the medical facility with non-life-threatening injuries, but their house was hit with more than 10 rounds, and one of their neighbors' homes was also struck with stray bullets. After an investigation, Philip Mendoza Jr., a 60-year-old resident of Akron, was charged with murder and 4 counts of felonious assault in connection with the incident. According to police, the victims were ambushed by 2 people on foot while they were pulling into their driveway. The assailants fired multiple shots at the victims, striking the 2 adults and the baby. After the shooting, the suspects fled the scene on foot and then reportedly got into a vehicle to escape. The motive for the attack is unknown, but police are actively investigating the case. In May 2023, the Akron Police Department executed a search warrant at a residence on Edwards Avenue and took Mendoza into custody. He was booked on Friday, May 5th, and is currently being held at the Summit County Jail as he awaits trial. Number 1. Mormon murder. In January 2023, a man shot his entire family of 8 after learning that his wife was planning to divorce him. Inside a rural home in Utah, police found the lifeless bodies of a family during a welfare check at the property. The victims were identified as the man's wife, his mother-in-law, and his 5 children. The assailant was 42-year-old Michael Haight, an insurance salesman who opened fire on his family before turning the gun on himself. The 5 children, 3 girls aged 17, 12, and 7, and 2 boys aged 7 and 4, were all killed in the shooting, along with Haight's 78-year-old mother-in-law and his 40-year-old wife Tasha, who'd filed a divorce on December 21st, 2022. Her husband was served with the divorce papers 6 days later, but the reasoning behind their separation is unknown, as Utah law keeps details of divorce proceedings confidential. On the night before the tragic incident, Tasha and other members of her family attended a church group for young women, according to the Enoch City Mayor, Jeffrey Chestnut. The bodies were discovered by the police at around 4 p.m. on a Wednesday, after a report that Tasha had missed an appointment, prompting a welfare check. Tasha's divorce attorney, James Park, stated that she hadn't expressed any worry that her husband would physically assault her, but he declined to disclose any specifics. The home where the victims were found was located in a newly built neighborhood of single-family houses on a ridge overlooking the city of Enoch. The place was decorated with Christmas lights and had an incredible view of the distant mountains. The deceased victims were well-known members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, otherwise known as the Mormon Church. Many nearby residents attended church with the family or attended school with the Haight's young children. Each of the victims appeared to have sustained a gunshot wound, and with no one left to hold accountable, all the questions regarding the circumstances leading to the shooting are left unanswered. Would you rather deal with a harmless but creepy neighbor that always inserts himself into your life, or have an ex-flame regularly contact you while intoxicated, wanting to get back together? Let us know in the comments down below, and don't forget to subscribe. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time on Bad Badger.